to the big cities and to the remote regions as well. The EAEU, along with the Eurasian Development Bank, promptly reacted to that challenge and started working on setting up the single commodity distribution system. What questions, challenges, and opportunities for the single commodity distribution system do exist within the EAEU plus Tajikistan and Uzbekistan? This is something we're going to discuss today. Along with us would be representatives of the international organizations and the public authorities as well as the private sector. My name is Armen Arutyunyan, Director of the Department for Agricultural Policy of the EAEU, would act as the moderator. This session will be held in a hybrid mode. We have speakers who will speak online. As well, we have offline speakers. They welcome the first group of speakers, which consists of the representatives of the public authority and international organizations. I invite our esteemed speakers to the podium. Artak Gamalyan, member of the College of the Ministry of Industry and Agriculture of the EAEU. Amangildi Isenov, Deputy Chair of the Eurasian Development Bank. Mr. Kerabyan, Minister of Economy of Armenia. Mr. Janibekov, Minister of Agriculture of Kyrgyzstan. Alexei Bogdanov, Deputy Minister for Agriculture of Belarus. And last but not least, Zhenis Asyanbay, Deputy Minister for Agriculture from Kazakhstan. Let me introduce to you the online speakers. Zizoda Rizai, Minister of Agriculture of Tajikistan. Vladimir Rakhmanin, Deputy Director General of FAO, United Nations, and Regional Representative for EMEA. Olga Gatagova, Deputy Minister for Agriculture of the Russian Federation. Before we start our discussion, I suggest to watch a video which was prepared by our colleagues from the Eurasian Development Bank. Please watch the screen. The EAEU countries, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, have one of the biggest human resources capital, as well as other riches, which let them play an important role in the international food market. In 2020, the agricultural production in the EU nations grew by 2.3%, and the volume of mutual trade in food goods exceeded $12 billion. Further development of the trade between the partners today has been curbed and restricted by the shortages in the infrastructure, risks related to the climate change, and farming also translate in the rise in the prices of food, wastes during the transportation of food, and dependence on the imports. In order to make the EAEU coming F4 as one of the centers for the food production, we need a new level of coordination between the partners. We have to consolidate the financial and technical resources. The integration can be followed by setting up of the single commodity distribution system for raw materials and food. I suggest that we consider setting up a single commodity distribution system between the interested parties of the EAEU. What mechanisms are going to be most efficient in order to address these challenges? What will make the Eurasian commodity distribution system really efficient? Dear colleagues, in saying that, I suggest that we proceed with the discussion. Please stick to the time limit of no more than 3 minutes. For the presentation of the concept of single commodity distribution system, EAEU plus, I pass the floor to Mr. Kamalyan, and Deputy Chair of the Eurasian Development Bank, Amangildi Isenov. Over to you. Is my mic on? Good morning. I hope that the morning is really very good, and we gathered in the early hours, and only the bank could gather us. Without that input, actually, we'll never gather in such early hours and to never speak up even on such important topics. But actually, the topic raised is very timely. What took place in the world of the last year and a half, this turbulence and ups and downs in prices, the rupture of the food chain supply, makes us take some preventive measures in order to improve the sustainability in delivering food to supplying food to our people. Last year, end of last year, at a session of the Supreme Council of the EAEU, President Tokayev, as you heard him speaking, suggested to consider setting up a single commodity distribution system. The Commission and our block, our Department of Agricultural Policy, embarked on considering that topic and elaboration of that topic. We held multiple meetings with the representatives of the farming business and representatives of the agricultural companies, processing companies, logistics companies, and these meetings resulted in a conclusion that this topic is very relevant, very timely, and may bring some practical advantage in terms of optimizing logistics in general. In our surveys and researches, we proceeded from three groups of prerequisites. The first group is about the external prerequisites or external factors which may contribute to setting up of the single commodity distribution systems. That means we have huge agricultural resources. The EAEU is number 2 in the world in terms of the arable lands. We have high-level human potential. We have necessary technologies in order to boost the produce production. We enjoy beneficial geographical position, and we have a need to improve our food security. As concerns the internal prerequisites, the second group, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that within the EAEU we have to increase the internal turnover, really do the import substitution, especially in the pot of the food products and agricultural products such as berries and fruits, where we depend on import by more than 50%. And the third group of prerequisites is about the regulatory system which is needed in order to set up such a single commodity distribution system. We have the union agreement. We have already came up with an elaborated regulatory system that would facilitate the delivery of food products from the farm to the shelves of the stores in the shortest time possible. We realized that such big projects would require certain resources, financial resources, and along with our colleagues from the Eurasian Development Bank, started elaborating the concept of the single commodity distribution system. I will not deep dive into the concept itself, because the concept is to be finalized yet, and I hope that in the first quarter next year it would be done, and my colleague will speak in more detail about that. So I'm passing the floor over to him so that he could highlight the main elements of the SCDS and other concepts of the single commodity distribution system. So over to you. Good morning, colleagues. Really, we decided just to start talking business in early hours of the morning, so the breakfast is the most important meal, and therefore we decided to gather early in the morning to discuss these important topics. In order to continue that conversation, that discussion, I'd like to highlight some aspects and factors which, due to the applied research, have been revealed. What will be the backbone of the proposed single commodity distribution system? It would rest on a digital platform. Among the users of that platform, you would find the public authorities and commercial companies or stakeholders, which include agricultural companies, SMEs, which produce food products, logistics providers, and food products transportation companies. This platform is called for to integrate all the data available from the data systems, existing private information systems from the companies which are operational on the territory of the EAEU. This platform would be managed by a single operator as actually its legal framework. This is what we yet have to determine, how this entity would look like in order to make it comfortable and convenient for all the stakeholders. But the main message is that all the stakeholders of that single system should have a convenient tool of interaction. Along with that, it would entail the need to use understanding and working out of single rules of the game, kind of a global streamlining. We will have to come up with the common terms. Single operator functionality have to be embedded, as well as the monitoring system, which has to be set up in order to provide for coordination within the system itself. Methodological support to the services rendered, these are things which go without saying, something that the operator has to do by default. Next slide, please. Naturally, we have to consider the uniqueness in the economic development of every stakeholder within the EAEU, EAEU+, the strategic priorities, culture, other things which are clearly very important. Also, one of the most important tasks is to contribute to the development of SMEs. As I mentioned before, one of the objectives of the system is to provide for equality without curbing the interests of the small-size entrepreneurs. Therefore, the system would rest on the following principles: the collegial management system, open non-discriminatory access, transparency of functioning regardless of what entities actually are to be incorporated into the system, and type of the business that the stakeholders are doing, and that would provide for the transparency of the system for all the stakeholders. And as the old slogan goes, the collective farm is a voluntary business. And this principle actually will be taken as one of the guiding ones. We understand that the single system will act as a tool of integration, but it should not be detrimental for adjacent systems. So it means that the adjacent national private systems have to be able to work in an isolated manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, colleagues. You both set the right sort of tone for our discussion. And now using the opportunity of having with us our strategic partner and good friend for the Eurasian Economic Commission and for the Eurasian Bank of Development, Mr. Vladimir Rachmanin, who is online with us, Deputy Director General of FAO and head of FAO Eastern Europe and Central Asia Division. Can you hear us, Mr. Rachmanov? Yes, I can. I can even see you. Excellent. So our warmest welcome to you from Moscow. And we have a question for you. We know that the transportation system can be quite a burden on the environment. And FAO has been studying the functioning of commodity distribution systems across the world for years. What does the global experience look like here? How can this affect the climate agenda in the Eurasian region? Thank you very much, Mr. Arutunian. Dear friends and colleagues, it's my pleasure to participate, even if it's online, in the Second Eurasian Congress. The warmest welcomes from FAO. The countries of the Eurasian macro-region are extremely important in providing food security not just within the region but beyond its borders. Our regional office, which is headquartered in Budapest, together with the FAO Moscow office, are coordinating our work in this region, and we intend to make it even more intense. Now, to your question, FAO has always looked at international food trade as one of its priority subjects, a source of synergy. Commodity distribution systems affect prices for food in national markets, and it affects every aspect of food security. The availability, the accessibility of food, the use of food, and the sustainability of food supply. Commodity distribution systems make it possible for national food producers to expand their production by reaching external markets, by implementing cutting-edge technologies to supplement local food markets. Such connection chains can help positive transformations in the agricultural sector and can foster a transition from low-intensive to highly intensive agricultural production. Last week, FAO published its annual report, the situation in global food production and agriculture. The subject of the year was sustainability of the food supply under stress, such as the pandemic that we are now living through. This publication is also available in Russian. This report states, after analysis, that sustainable functioning of commodity distribution systems is a foundation for the robustness of national food security systems. So this makes us look at the Eurasian commodity distribution systems as a major player in the Eurasian region. Long land borders and the existing transportation infrastructure support and sustain exchanges of goods and services. Most of the countries of the macro region are landlocked, so they have to bear high transaction costs of transportation over land. sometimes non-tariff measures are added to that and other barriers are erected. Today's logistical infrastructure and transportation corridors mostly act on the local level and they are subject to national legislation. Storage and distribution are limited and this increases the time of delivery. Supply and demand are not always well coordinated because of the lack of digital databases. This leads to shortages and growing prices, limited demand and abundance of intermediaries in the market. And this is a constraint on the free movement of goods and supplies for the population of the region. Threats to food delivery became particularly acute in the times of the coronavirus pandemic. So we can state that the single commodity distribution system of the Eurasian region will help overcome these bottlenecks and minimize food shortages and volatility. As you develop and adjust your system, you have to bear in mind three principles. First, the scope of the task is unprecedented, but you have very good preconditions for success here. Number two, be sure to include producers in your system. Make your system not something that only connects intermediaries, but if you have producers on board, this will lead to unification of production and sanitary standards. And the third thing to bear in mind is the use of digital platforms. National platforms must take into account the sensitivity of the tasks and the sensitivity of the issue of access to national informational platforms. This is an important matter, but it can be overcome. And something about the way that commodity distribution systems can affect the environment. Certainly the risks are there. FAO has demonstrated it in its calculations. For some countries, self-sufficiency in food production can be a very expensive project. In the short term, commodity distribution systems can help overcome momentary shortages and minimize waste of food and waste of other resources. It will help optimize production and distribution processes, and as such, this will minimize the environmental impact. I want to congratulate you on picking up this subject for your discussion. It's a sad thing that I only had 6 minutes of time to deliver my message. I wish you every success in your further deliberations. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahmani, for your detailed, fact-filled presentation. Please stay with us for the rest of the day. And now we're giving the floor to the representatives of national governments and national observers. We expect to hear from them statements about the promises and risks of stakeholders and potential stakeholders. Let me give the floor to speakers in alphabetical order of country names in Russian. Mr. Karaban, representing the government of Armenia, what is your idea of commodity distribution systems? Good morning, friends. Thank you for choosing this important subject for our discussion this morning. It makes me think about our Intergovernmental Commission meeting that we held this spring with Kazakhstan, when we talked with my colleague, Mr. Nursultan, about the reasons for our mutual trade being so small. And it transpired that the biggest constraint was expensive logistics and unavailable logistics sometimes. This must be true of all the other member countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, with the exception of Russia, that is the connecting member of the Union. So there are 12 member states in the Union, but most of the trade within the Union is conducted between Russia and individual other members, not between the members directly. So in this respect, the single commodity distribution system can play a key role and a breakthrough role for remedying this. For instance, there is certainly a need for Uzbek goods in Armenia or Armenian goods in Kazakhstan and so on. It must be no lower than the need for our goods in Russia. So there's great potential here. I'm sure that this project is bound to be successful. And as in the past, General Director of the largest retail system for Armenia, with a strong logistical system that were built, covering the whole span from the field to the shop. I can tell you that there is really great importance in building this chain of connections and minimizing costs there. Let me tell you, almost 70% of all the products, everything produced in agriculture is wasted. And this waste can be reduced if the distribution system is effective. And this is the only way to achieve a sustainable system of food supply and food sufficiency. Thank you very much, Mr. Janibekov. This is a very important aspect of our subject that you pointed out, waste and curbing waste. It's really a big issue for all the members of the Eurasian Economic Union. Now, I'm giving the floor to Mr. Askarbek Janibekov. Recently, meeting with the Minister of the Eurasian Economic Commission, you discussed some of the tasks that you set yourselves and the cluster model that can help resolve them. Please tell us more about it and about your vision of commodity distribution systems. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, dear friends and colleagues and organizers of this conference. Thank you for bringing us together and making us start our work at breakfast time in this no-nonsense way, and I hope our day will be very productive. Colleagues, in Kyrgyzstan, we see that agricultural production will be enhanced by means of a cluster development program that we're planning. As you know, in Kyrgyzstan, after the reform of 1992, we now have 450,000 small and medium-sized agricultural enterprises. And Kyrgyzstan's export potential dropped as the number of producers increased. So why do we need a cluster system? What do we expect from it? We see it as a major instrument of bringing together our farmers and helping them join their efforts. And we also expect that this will help us boost our export potential. Cluster development and next to it the building of logistical and distribution centers, and we see these measures as matters of primary importance here. Despite the coronavirus pandemic that struck us in 2020 and affected many economies, Kyrgyzstan's export increased. And we've suddenly faced the problem of supplying export goods of equal sustainable quality. Today, we are doing this in Kyrgyzstan. We're building 6 logistical centers for exports. We already have 9. And we believe that a single commodity distribution system or network could help us in this work. For instance, let me mention that transporting our products across other countries can sometimes be problematic, and such a distribution system might help. The single commodity distribution system that we're planning must emphasize transportation over land. One example that we want to state is Khargos. Potentially, it can handle 15 million tons of products, but in actuality it's just 3 million tons carried now. Kyrgyzstan's geographical situation requires strong connections in overland transportation. Our chairman gave us very little time to state our case. I hope I'll have an opportunity to take the floor again later. Thank you very much, Mr. Janibekov. You've done a great job with your short time limit. You've demonstrated what level of professionalism you display in the work in your ministry. We will discuss the cluster model in one of the next discussions, and you will tell us more about it. Now, Mr. Rizai, Minister of Agriculture of Tajikistan, we know that your country has a lot of small agricultural producers. Do you see potential for the single commodity distribution system of involving them in the supply chain? Thank you very much. Esteemed participants of the Second Eurasian Congress, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, speaking on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture of Tajikistan, allow me to welcome you and wish you successful, productive work in this Congress. The pandemic has distorted our work, but agriculture in our countries can be a stabilizing factor and a source of growth despite that. Despite 30 years of developing a market economy, we're still encountering difficulties when we think about supplying our retail chains with locally produced goods. Intermediary companies and a lack of logistical operators, unpredictable relations between market players are all sources of difficulties. Add to that a scarcity of storage, packing and transportation facilities, and you will see the sources of waste and loss that we experience. Imported goods come in through well-packed and logistically supported. And this makes imported goods more attractive to retail networks. What we need to do in response to that, is set up a single commodity distribution system that can do as well. Today we have 350 storage centers, both with and without cooling facilities. 46 of them have refrigerator facilities. These storage facilities are unevenly distributed across the territory and are not connected with any information networks. Tajik producers mostly have to sell their agricultural produce to intermediaries and lose part of their profit on that.
Especially, this is typical of the farmers who have no access to the infrastructure. So on the preliminary estimates, the producers get only 20 to 25% of the prices. Due to setting up wholesale and retail logistics centers, the prices can be reduced by 20% from the current level, and decreasing the losses and wastes from transportation to 45–50%. We are fully supportive of setting up a single commodity distribution system at the first stage in setting up a similar system at the national level, enjoying the PPP mechanism, invited donors, so that later on it could somehow accede to the single commodity distribution system at the second stage. We suggest to set up a network which would consist of 3 different infrastructural systems: a unified system for the storage, for distribution, and setting up a pool of farmers, exporters, importers, the buyers of logistics companies from the EAEU. Therefore, an agreement was reached between the Ministry of Agriculture of Tajikistan and the Eurasian Development Bank. In terms of facilitating the data exchange, so that we could come up with the concept for the single commodity distribution system. Another incentive is about promoting new distribution channels. It opens up a window of opportunity for the SMEs, so that they could consolidate their produce in big batches to be delivered to the neighboring countries. Colleagues, we believe that a single commodity distribution system, which is based on the mutual interests of all the parties, may become a catalyst in providing food security in the region, increasing the volume of trade turnover and facilitating the food supply to the consumers. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Mr. Minister, for your detailed presentation. When elaborating on that issue, we'll work closely with your ministry so that all the objectives which you have highlighted in your pitch are included into our research. Thank you so much. Saying that, I would like to pass the floor to Igor Bogdanov, Deputy Minister for Agriculture of Belarus. Agriculture in Belarus is one of the main drivers for economic growth in the country. Can you share your view of the commodity distribution systems? Dear colleagues, dear participants, that Congress, Belarus probably is one of the main beneficiaries from that project, and we really are fully supportive of that project. Why? Because we are supplying about 80% of Belarus export out of $6 billion potential of our export production to the EAEU. And physically, the link which has actually to benefit from that in that chain would be us, the consumers. There are 3 problems which emerged in the food market due to the pandemic and the political processes, and escalation of the political processes around our countries. And this project may help us address these challenges and issues. Logistics, which saw the prices going up, and suddenly it resulted in the price hikes. It has never been the case for such high prices in the EAEU once we increase the supply by means of implementing that platform. With lots of logistics stakeholders, the high rate of competition would drive the transportation costs down. Secondly, that's about storage, especially for fresh category. Not everywhere we have high-quality storage facilities for cooled meat, for fresh products, and therefore once we see the setup of such centers, it will provide for a high quality of products. And another moment is bring down the number of intermediaries between the producer and the end user today. Today, actually, we have a lot of them, starting from farmers to the shelves. There would be 2 to 3 intermediaries which are reselling the produce, and certainly this results in the higher prices for the end users. This project is aimed at seeing the base. We will engage all the producers, and they will be very much interested to accede to that project, and really that would be very helpful for everyone, and the consumers, the buyers, especially the retail networks which are located on the territory of our countries, have to be part of that project so that they would understand where they can buy produce with a minimum number of intermediaries. Belarus in general is very much supportive of that project. It's very important for the developers to take these issues into consideration and to try to offer specific competitive edges for all the stakeholders in our countries. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexei. You have raised a question which is pivotal for the whole research, how we bring down the prices, optimizing the costs and optimizing the routes in order to provide for physical affordability and accessibility along with the Eurasian Development Bank. We are elaborating on these issues, and I think that in the first half year next year we'll provide you with the answers. I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Azarbayeva, Deputy Minister of Agriculture from Kazakhstan. In particular, I'd like to stress that Kazakhstan invests a lot into digitalization. They bring about a lot of innovations and invest heavily into the human capital. And as far as this initiative was first spelled out by the president of your country, what's your view of that project? What's your take on that project? Thank you so much, the organizers. I'd like to welcome all the participants in that Congress has been said. Mr. Tokayev, President of Kazakhstan, was behind that idea of setting up a single commodity distribution system. Colleagues from the FAO told us about the challenges on that way. Let me tell you what we are doing in the Republic. We plan to set up a commodity distribution system which will include 24 facilities. It is going to be implemented in 4 different stages. First of all, there would be a single center for the storage, for distribution, and at the moment we set up a company which initiated that project. The project was supported, which is being implemented following the PPP principle, and the first stage is almost over. The Kazakhstani Development Bank provided necessary funds, so we do believe that next year we'll embark on the implementation. The whole system actually will cover the whole territory of the Republic with those 24 facilities. It would act as a skeleton. It would be complemented by the storage for fruits and vegetables. And generally speaking, we are working with the Central Asian republics, and for instance, we are setting up such logistics centers along with the Ministry of Agriculture of Uzbekistan. Our experts are on business mission in Uzbekistan and are selecting necessary locations and border trading centers are to be set up. Also, dedicating some land for the industrial zones for construction of food processing facilities. Similar facilities are to be set up along with Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzia. Similar facilities, about 2 or 3 such centers, will be set up along with Russia, therefore Kazakhstan. Supports very much the idea of setting up a single commodity distribution system. We see a lot of benefits, a lot of opportunities in that system. As was said, the main objective is to bring down the costs. So we are very much supportive of that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Janice. In future, we're going to work with you and your team in order to facilitate mutual trade and export from the EAEU countries. So that I'd like to invite Deputy Minister of Agriculture of Russia, Olga. Would you share your view of that? In the course of the Eastern Economic Forum, there was a panel dedicated to logistics, which was called the New Oil of Russia. What is your take on the single commodity distribution system? What objectives and what benefits we can get? Thank you so much, Mr. Rutin, on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture of the Russian Federation, and personally, I would like to welcome all the participants in that Congress, dear colleagues. The EAEU member states are totally self-sufficient in terms of the food security, and further development of the agricultural system of the EAEU would depend on the rise in the trade turnover between our countries. I believe that setting up a single commodity distribution system would contribute to that. Russia takes all the measures possible in order to facilitate that idea. The Ministry of Agriculture of Russia is involved in an industrial project of the Ministry of Transport to set up the transport logistics centers, which would facilitate the transportation of commodity on the railways. This project actually provides for the aggregate amount of cargo to be transported to the tune of 52.9 million tons. We have about 30 wholesale distribution centers with a total capacity, storage capacity of about 2 million tons. We are providing public support to the producers of produce in Russia and auxiliary companies. The Ministry of Agriculture is in charge of the agricultural production with an aim to increase the exports. Therefore, we are very much interested in the implementation of these concepts of single commodity distribution system, and are fully supportive of that. When setting up a single commodity distribution system, we believe it is necessary to take advantage of the experience accumulated in our countries. Thank you so much. Thank you, Olga. Thank you for your continuous support that we enjoy within the EAEU, especially the single commodity distribution system will continue our cooperation with the Ministry in order to provide for the fruitful outcome. I'd like to thank the representatives of the national governments, ministers and deputy ministers. Thank you for your contributions. Would you please take your seats so that we could start the second part of our discussion with the private sector, representatives of the private sector. I invite representative of the Union of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists of Republic of Armenia, Mr. Sherikyan. Director of the National Logistics Network, Mikhail Filipov. Director General of Aitu Sauda, Mr. Ketebekov. Director General of Eurasian Agri-Logistics, Alevtina Kirillova. Online, I invite Andrei Galantsev, Chairman of the Board. Andrei, before we start our session, let me express my best wishes to you. Happy birthday on that remarkable day, and we're very much glad that it coincided with our event. Dear colleagues, from the private sector, you said that the national governments are fully supportive of the single commodity distribution system in terms of the investments into the infrastructure and providing necessary regulatory framework. What would be your take on the commodity distribution system? I'm passing the floor to Mr. Sherikyan from the Armenian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. Armenia is the only country within the EAEU which has no borders with other stakeholders. Will the commodity distribution system facilitate integration with other EAEU members, and how will it influence the process? Thank you. I'm glad to welcome everyone. This question was raised several years ago when Armenia was about to accede to the EAEU. And there were questions whether it makes sense and would it be detrimental in the sense that we don't have common borders with the EAEU member states. It was obvious that the time provided answer to that question. In the first 5 years for accession to the EAEU, our trade turnover with Russia increased fivefold, three times. Our trade turnover with Kazakhstan and Belarus, although actually the trade turnover is not so big, but it increased 2 times. So the answer is obvious. Once we set up a good, efficient mechanism which helps to address the existing problems, certainly it will give a boost to the trade rise, trade growth. For instance, we have the following challenge at the moment. As a businessman, I like to focus on some specific things. For instance, when cargo goes through Georgia, it has to be sealed, and in Armenia we put the seals in the warehouses where the loading takes place. And the cargo which goes from Russia, the sealing, customs sealing, is done at Verkhnya Larja, which actually has a lot of traffic jams. Once we address that problem, then it would help us to facilitate the trade turnover. What companies are to be engaged? For instance, in Armenia, we have 2 or 3 companies which are doing that. If we integrate these 2 logistics operators into that structure, it will give us a positive effect. And number 3, I do hope that everything would be great, but for instance, I saw the following situation unfolding in front of my eyes. Story related to one of the companies from our group.
For the past 20 years, we've seen Cuba do something of the kind with Cuban cigars, its major export. Cuba decided that they want to remove all the intermediaries and contact directly, set up a direct contact between the producer and the end retail seller. Some 20 years ago, Cuba went to Europe and they proposed to European distributors and they offered them a deal. They retained 50% of the shares in the company to retain the market. When they came to Russia and to Armenia, they did not do the same. They simply started selling directly from their own warehouse at prices that are cheaper than the distributors. The end result is Cuba has lost a big share of the market. From the past 80% of the market, Cuba now hardly covers 50%. And retailers are now buying cigars from Ecuador, from Nicaragua, and from other countries. Well, if we take a global view of the things, over the 20 years, when intermediaries were removed from the supply chain, have shown no growth. Nicaraguan cigars, which started from zero level after their civil war, are now sharing first place with Dominicana. So the devil is in the details. We can talk about the theory of the thing, but we cannot ignore the specific issues that exist in specific markets and act accordingly for the best results. Thank you very much, Mr. Shuriken. You have pointed out some issues that we will keep in mind. We know that our colleagues who are working on the issues that you outlined are paying attention already. Customs processes are very important. But one point, we're not going to trade in cigars, but we will talk about that to our colleagues from the National Financial Institute. Mr. Andrei Golantsev, connected to us online, your company is a leader of the trading and logistical business. What problems do you envisage connected with the setting up of the single commodity distribution system? You're also a major digitalization force in the industry. What prospects do you see there? Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for having me here at this important meeting. Let me start with the simple part, the digital platform. Here the answer is simple and straightforward. If the single commodity distribution system becomes a legal entity that is going to integrate all the participants in a single legal status, they will certainly need a single digital platform, a matrix that will embrace all the information that flows in the system according to a single standard. Without that, we will be swamped by matters of customs, as was already illustrated, and quarantine and phytosanitary controls, and so on. In the near future, deals will be concluded with registration in electronic form, and they will be accounted for using even small amounts of goods supplied. We are already working actively with the Russian ministries, the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Transportation. I have some experience to share that I think will be relevant. But first, we would like to see government involvement along the same lines as our Kazakhstan partners are having. We believe that the state needs to be more active there. It needs to be one of the stakeholders in the process. My second point is that, on the other hand, the involvement of the state can be a burden on the system by setting up deadlines and all sorts of encumberments. So the involvement of the government must be limited and regulated. And I'm not even talking about subsidies. Businesses can manage without them. What's important is that administrative regulation must be exercised in favor of the companies involved by opening up transportation corridors where the state can simplify the carriage of goods and the flow of information for stakeholders involved in the network, and also provide simplified measures of control in such spheres as customs, taxes, and sanitary quarantines. The so-called green corridors is what we need. And this is the best thing that a single commodity distribution can need and use. That if that is implemented, then such a system can become a real practical tool, not just a platform for online discussions as it is now. So we want everybody to play their part in the process. And certainly this cannot be done at the level of individual ministries. Customs services, in whether in Russia or Kazakhstan or anywhere, will not listen to us if we're not a truly single commodity distribution systems. Thank you very much. One of the components of the research that we conducted together with the Eurasian Bank of Development actually involved the notion of green corridors. And also we studied the physical infrastructure, optimal routes of supplies, and digital platforms. I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Ketebekov, who heads the Adolf certified system. What must such a digital platform look like on the Eurasian level? How must it function? Good morning. Thank you for having me here in this interesting discussion. I'd like to share with you some of the lessons we've learned. from our project of being involved in the commodity distribution system. We worked together with the Ministry of Trade and Integration of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. We are working on a number of integration processes. We represent the Eurasian group of companies that is very active internationally. We have serious assets in countries that are major suppliers of agricultural products in the world, such as Brazil and South Africa and other major suppliers. And now, what are some of the results that we have to show? We have a matrix onto which we aggregate data derived from private companies. So we are integrated with all the information systems that are available in the production chain. And we combine this private data with government data, the data from the Committee for Government Revenues, that's our tax authority. We process data from electronic invoices and also data from fiscal sources. You might say that the economic activity of each individual in our country is somehow accounted for in our system. And we analyze this data. So we combine different sources of information, starting from the National Statistical Bureau, which is a benchmark source of information for us. But we include also data that is generated with every purchase of every good. And using that, we monitor the dynamics of sales of socially significant goods, such as food, for instance, because we want to make sure we can arrest the uncontrolled growth of prices. In fact, we've been successful here, and we have curbed food prices. We are now back to the starter level, back to the level of inflation that is our target, which is 9.5% for socially significant goods, 19 categories of such goods. This project includes a number of specific mechanisms, stabilization funds, loans to retail companies, rotating system of loans for retail companies, which makes it possible for such companies to guarantee the purchase of such goods that can be further supplied to the end buyer at prices below the market average. So we don't just analyze financial data and fiscal data. We look at all the global fluctuations that are known about, because today Kazakhstan, as you see from the operations of a retail company, is importing about 50% of the goods it sells, mostly from Russia, but also from other countries of Central Asia and elsewhere. So we're importing a lot of what we call exotic goods, such as bananas or oranges. But if we look at the structure of the prices in our market, we've been able to identify, by studying the invoices, to identify the factors that are at play here. And this is what our analysis showed. We looked at food security as one aspect of the issue. Here we're monitoring 49 categories of foodstuffs. 19 of them are connected with the specific measures of government support and government interventions that are associated with stabilization funds and their revolving loans. But this is government money. It must be spent with full transparency. And so with that in mind, we look at procurement, which will have to be supported by B2B platforms, making them totally transparent and monitored to see if the retail chains are really working with these revolving loans. Some of our retail chains have proposed an initiative of not applying a surcharge of more than 10%. And we see that, judging by the data from our stabilization fund, we're mostly focusing on revolving loans for success. We are a private company. We are offering a serious infrastructure both in our B2B function and B2C function. We are a major logistical player. We try to monetize that through doing the end purchaser profiling exercise. We know the profile of a typical client who purchases goods in our chains. We draw information from checks of retail purchases and analyze that, anonymizing that, so we can see, for instance, how much of each kind of nutrient each household buys. It's something similar to WeChat on the level of the Republic of Kazakhstan. This is a few words about ourselves. So we have 1,300 employees. We have invested a hefty sum of $150, and we're part of the ERG companies group. A few words to add. I heard the question here of how we see integration from the point of view of the integration into a single commodity distribution system as a major IT player. There are certain such systems already in place, and a lot of the transactions are already integrated in those. We also have national level commodity distribution systems. My colleague Mikhail will tell you more about that. We are already working with 14 distribution centers that are built under the aegis of national programs. We believe that the Eurasian Bank of Development could set up an information exchange facility for national commodity distribution systems to develop common standards. This is tax information, so it's sensitive and not easily shared between countries. But commodity distribution systems could filter out the kind of information that is appropriate to be shared. With regard to cross-border transactions in the Eurasian Economic Union. We don't mind being a pilot organization in this process. We're working with Russians, Mercury and Chesniznak to set common standards in data exchange, and we might issue recommendations for the Eurasian Bank of Development.
Thank you so much, Alexander, for a detailed presentation. You stressed the importance of big data generation, using big data to determine the behavioral pattern of the consumers and their preferences. Recently, at the meeting of the Ministers of Agriculture of the EAEU, we stressed the importance for digitalization of the agriculture. Ministers instructed us to develop a concept for digitalization of the agriculture, setting up the registers, generating big data and using the big data for more targeted public support. We are working in that direction and probably will meet you in order to exchange our views. Colleagues, we spoke about the concept, the feasibility of that concept, and the concept is supported by the public authorities and by the private sector as well. But there are people who already are implementing similar projects. Saying that, I'd like to invite Mikhail Filipov, Director of the National Logistics Network. Your company is the main operator in setting up a commodity distribution system in Kazakhstan. What is the concept behind it, and what is the future? What is your take on the interaction with the Eurasian commodity distribution system? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I will try actually to speak for no more than 3 minutes. Otherwise, well, Mr. Mishustin, as concerns the commodity distribution system, there are lots of problems, and they were outlined very correctly, but we have similar problems in Kazakhstan. We have certain sequence as how we have to tackle these issues. The first problem is, first of all, about access to the distribution market or sales market. I'm glad that we're speaking a lot about logistics, etc., etc. But number one, this is about the access to the sales market for the farmers. And agricultural producers worked a lot with the X5 group, and they cannot work directly with the farmers, and they don't want, actually. They want, but they cannot. They'd like to work. They cannot work directly with the farmers from Central Asia because there are no quality standards intact. The first stage of our infrastructure, the Agri-Logistics Centers, are aimed at addressing the problem of lack of confidence and trust between the farmers and the distributors. So these centers are not only about the warehouses, but this is a whole ecosystem round, meaning standards or developing unified standards, packaging, and delivery to the destination without transshipment, etc., etc., without mediators. IT is very important there because retail is about transparency. This is about the data, and somehow we can upload that into some systems through some buses and start the shipment. The second problem for the producers, this is about the current funds. They are running out of money and they try to sell as soon as possible the produce from the field. And these two solutions are complementing to each other. So once we set up confidence between the farmers and the distributors, then we can come up some forward options. We can subsidize the seeding stock, and means that the farmers no longer have to sell their products immediately to the intermediaries. As for the losses and wastes, it may amount to 60 or 70%. And this problem can be addressed by means of the forward transactions. Agri-consulting services are offered, and necessary fertilizers can be supplied. We can help in selection of the appropriate seeds with the long shelf life. only then the commodity distribution system may start working, may take off the ground. It can be packaged in an IT system, and this is the way actually that we may address the problem comprehensively. As concerns the Eurasian commodity distribution system, naturally, it offers a huge potential. We know that it offers a multi-billion-dollar potential to increase the internal trade turnover and export volumes. We can export our products to the Gulf nations, to the EU nations. And once we do that, we will have to bet on the volume guarantees and standardization. We take a no-nonsense approach. We suggest that when setting up the concept, we have to engage representatives of small and medium-sized retailers as the main drivers of the distribution. The trend setters in Russia, that would be Magnet, Komandor, X5, Almi in Belarus, and Magnum Small, and even Korzinka in Uzbekistan, as far as we're speaking about EAEU plus area. I suggest that in years' time we'll be sitting on a stage like today, and we won't be discussing some imaginary frameworks, but would be signing contracts and discussing how the first truck passed through that corridor. And the role of the state, and the colleagues correctly noted that the role of the state would be about some infrastructural support, some legislative support, but then actually the private business would address all the problems on its own, and the state doesn't have to interfere with the practical work. So I suggest that in years' time we discuss actually more practically in an extended format all these issues. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Filipa, for being very detailed and very pragmatic. In a year's time, certainly we'll gather, but I can assure you that we will meet even sooner, because you outlined very important components of our work, and your help in elaborating on that would be needed. We are always open for cooperation, our shareholders and us. We have huge opportunities. We may offer different companies in different spheres. We'll be glad to cooperate. Thank you. Colleagues, I think that today we had a kind of a gender inequality, and the last speaker is Ms. Kirillova. We'll try to mitigate that imbalance somehow. Ms. Grigorieva, our director of Agri-Logistics Company. How? Eurasian Agri-Express will provide for the communication between the countries which are not connected by that express train. Well, dear friends, I'm glad to see all of you offline. Good afternoon. And I would like to welcome all our colleagues who have joined us online. I would like to thank the EDB for the opportunity to speak up. Let me, in a couple of minutes, tell you about the Agri-Express project, which has been implemented on the onshore corridors of the EAEU. This project was launched by Russian Railways Logistics, 100% owned by Russian Railways. This is one of the key logistics operators in the CIS countries, and along with the Export Center, we launched the very first Agri-Express from Moscow to China. Now this Agri-Express train goes through the Far Eastern ports. It also goes through Kazakhstan, Khargus. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic limitations, this route is not being used for the food products, so therefore actually this express goes to the Far Eastern ports of Russia. On November 15th, a pilot express was bound to Uzbekistan. Frozen chicken actually has been delivered to Uzbekistan, and Fruits and vegetables from Uzbekistan are being shipped to Moscow. The Agri-Express project is about bring export goods to Uzbekistan, Vietnam, and other Central and Southeast Asian nations. The very idea of the project is about an integrated use of the infrastructure to offer more synergy to bring down the cost of these deliveries. In 2020-2021, the project was joined by Kazakhstan and Belarus. Today, we are discussing the accession of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Armenia also is part of the talks to accede to the project. Agri-Express, this is an applied practical tool which would determine the logistics component between where the cargo is assembled. On the map you see 6 points where actually the cargo is collected. In Kazakhstan, this is Nur-Sultan, Shymkent, Karaganda. Tashkent, this is where the cargo is collected in Uzbekistan. So Agri-Express, this is a logistics channel of mutual deliveries between these key centers. This is about debottlenecking of our infrastructure. Also, green corridor which is being offered with the fiscal traceability. Customs and veterinary and phytosanitary agencies are involved. And we have such a fast-track approach between Russia and Kazakhstan, and other green customs corridors are being discussed. And we offer a competitive price for the delivery and full traceability and regularity. What the exporters and importers may get, they get a guaranteed channel. They know that on a certain specific day, a container train is to be launched, and actually you are free to buy one pallet or one container, several containers in that train. RZD Logistics is buying several new refrigeration containers for that project. 100 new containers have been bought. Kitaji Express, a subsidiary of Kazakhstani Railways, is a partner of the project and a key logistics operator on the territory of Kazakhstani train system. Brain Group Ursha is also part of the project and will deliver the goods to Slavtrans service terminal for further collection of goods, and Kyrgyz logistics operators also nominated the partners who are part of the talks. And yesterday I got back from Dushanbe, an inter-regional forum. We discussed Uzbekistan to accede to the project, and Azerbaijan will also become part of that project. So the Eurasian Agri-Logistics agreed the tariffs on the corridor from Russia to Uzbekistan, Russia, and China. We have published these tariffs, and the producers would know these prices for the year to come. Next slide shows the tariff for the cargo bound to China. It actually costs now $5,900 per one container, and it will be reduced to $5,000. And to Uzbekistan, actually, it would cost $3,650 per one container, or $146 per 1 kilo. On the way, following the logistics corridors and routes, more goods can be delivered from the warehouses and distribution centers, where new routes would be arranged. Multimodal approach is being used. The last mile is also embraced, while we are betting on the railway, because this is actually how we are reducing the carbon footprint. The automobile transport emits 0.5 kilo per ton, whereas railway actually emits 10 times less. And the railway and automobile corridors are operating in full capacity, and we are speeding up the delivery of goods for the consumers. The project is going to be implemented by 2030 stage by stage, and we're ready to set up the commodity distribution system providing for logistics services. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Ms. Kirillova, for a detailed presentation, dear colleagues. The main part of our today's discussion is over, but we have 6 minutes in order to answer several questions. Please take a mic if necessary. Raise your hands should you have any questions or comments. Yes, please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Shuriken Yuri from the International Export Facilitation Agency and head of the Association of Small and Medium-Sized Exporters. Actually, before we used to arrange about 40 missions abroad, and we are standing up for the small and medium-sized farmers and producers. Well, for small and mid-sized farmers, export is of no interest. The only idea is just to sell their produce to avoid problems with the weather, etc. I have a question. Judging by the experience of many countries of Central Asia and EAEU, we see that the national agricultural products aggregators may play an important role. And we have our offices in many Central Asian republics, for instance, in Uzbekistan. Guys from Ustra would aggregate the products from small farmers, then they would build partnerships with the Chinese partners and Russian partners, and the farmers would immediately deliver their produce and would get money immediately. And my question is, the Kazakhstani model implies PPP, public-private partnership mechanism. How do we protect the interests of the small and medium-sized enterprises? Which model would be more efficient? When the national aggregators are the public structures, the PPP structures, or if they act as private agencies, because we have to protect the interests of the small-sized enterprises. If it is a PPP mechanism, then the interest would be curbed. Selecting from the totally public structure, totally private structure, or PPP would be more efficient. Thank you so much for your question. Can you pass the mic to the Deputy Minister of Agriculture of Kazakhstan, Mr. Janis Aligbekov? Probably Michael can answer that question better than I do, but the main idea of the national commodity distribution system to be set up in Kazakhstan was about engaging small, medium-sized farmers. Big companies in Kazakhstan already have their own storage and warehouses. So they are quite self-sufficient, and they do not the contribution of the state or subsidies. Kazakhstan is developing the network of fruits and vegetables warehouses. Kazakhstan subsidizes 50% of such construction. And those who did this project systemically, they have certain advantages. As the representatives of our commodity distribution systems said, we are setting up agricultural logistics centers in order to engage small and medium-sized enterprises or farms. Then the anchor consolidators or professional stakeholders would deal with the stakeholders immediately, just offering forward deals, and the main objective, as I said, to facilitate the operation of small, medium-sized enterprises. Out of all the options which were offered, I would say that the PPP at the initial stage would be optimal, bearing in mind that at a later stage it has to remain private. Otherwise, there will be a shortage of investments, there will be a shortage of guarantees. This whole Eurasian commodity distribution system has to start as a PPP project, but then once the system takes off the ground and is launched, it has to remain private. The state has to create efficient infrastructural conditions to make sure the business works. As one of the speakers said, that we don't even need subsidies. Give us green corridors and the rest we'll do ourselves. And the green corridors question is being addressed already. And on December the 10th, at the Supreme Economic Council of the EAEU, and I hope that our presidents would sign an agreement on the navigation sails. This somehow would ease our life. It would be an important link of that green corridor. Thank you so much. Mikhail, would you add anything? Yes, I totally agree with the speakers.
Besides, all the points to do with heavy infrastructure and long money is best started by the state. And I'm not just talking about agro-logistical centers. It's just one component of a single commodity distribution system. There are also retail chains. They were first subsidized or supported by the state, but now they've gone free, and the state is just one of the shareholders. If we think about federal-level integration projects, it is a private-public partnership involving obligations on both sides. And to launch it, you need a lot of administrative resources, implementation, regulation, green corridors, and all that. Without the state, it would be much harder to implement. So we believe that to boost the project into life, we need government involvement, but later it might be reduced. I'd like to add something. You asked about aggregators, and there are some private aggregators, and they might do a better job even with a PPP-type infrastructure. They, as private entities, will work more efficiently. We all know that government entities are not noted for efficiency. Now, what we did when we set up our system, our IT platform, that is, we looked at the agricultural complex production system and saw that 70% of overall production is supplied by individual farms and small farming enterprises, so SMEs across the board. Simplifying Tier 1 aggregation by providing services through infrastructure is one of the first tasks we see. So we have this platform that can ensure the buy-in of aggregators that will bring their standards that will be relevant for the chains, retail chains. Our platform is now being tested in Magnet, in S5, and in other big retail chains in Russia. So even small producers if they can meet the standards that are required, can supply directly to big retail chains. Thank you very much. Colleagues, sadly, we've run out of time for our session. We hope that you will find opportunities to network with our speakers during the break. One last remark from the Deputy Chairman of the Eurasian Bank of Development and head of the Eurasian Agricultural Committee, who started off our discussion. Thank you, colleagues. I think we've had a very interesting and fruitful discussion. I mean, it's certainly useful to us, to those who are overseeing the development of the single commodity distribution system of EAEU. I was gratified to hear that most opinions, both on the government side and on the private sector side, were positive. All we heard about the prospective pluses and advantages of the SCDS. For instance, we heard about the enhanced trade turnover between Armenia and Kazakhstan from the minister. And we heard about the great opportunity to involve SMEs in this network. That was the opinion of the colleague from Kyrgyzstan. We remarked on how the SCDS is important if we are to increase exports to third-party countries. Digitalization was yet another thing that was favorably mentioned by all, and a systemic approach to finding algorithms and solutions for problems that we might have today. I found it very gratifying to hear the opinion of the private sector right now. We, as government players, can simply follow in the footsteps of businesses by providing the legal framework, the green corridors, and other facilities to foster the development of businesses and their approaches in the sphere of logistics and commodity distribution. So this meeting so early in the morning today, at 9 o'clock, has been worth it. We promised to take into consideration the opinions that we heard expressed here. We make a pledge to talk to businesses even further as we work on the Eurasian Commodity Distribution System Charter, and our aim is to make this system as effective as possible. Thank you very much, colleagues. I thank all the presenters. We heard a lot of useful and poignant opinions. It's a pleasure to understand that we are on the right track in our work. I was happy to hear positive opinions both from the part of the governments, but especially from the part of the businesses. Mr. Kitibekov shared with us an interesting idea about transit exchange chambers. The example of trading Cuban cigars well, it might be relevant, but it also goes to show that even if our community distribution system is planned as a comprehensive one, we will still have to make sure that there are certain things that are left out of it. It's a good example here. What I propose is that we continue this exchange of opinions on a regular basis. Mr. Filipov has suggested that we meet again next year with the same speakers, and we support that. And we are going to keep this promise both with our government players and our private players. Today, the purpose of this discussion was to hear the opinion in the field, to make sure that we are on the right track and we're doing the right thing, so we can keep on using that. And we have achieved it. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for being part of this discussion. This brings our session to a close.